Hello everybody. Today I'm going to be going over the turbine experiments. I'm going to break this up into a three-part video so it's easy to digest and watch over and over again if need be. So in this first experiment, what we're going to be covering is the creation of the complex game object. So hopefully this is review for most of you. You should know how to create a parent-child relationship in Unity and build that hierarchy of a complex game object. But why this matters to us now and why I'm going to take the time to go over it is because this hierarchy that we're building is going to be very important for actual construction of our animation, right? So this whole hierarchy is going to matter when we go to animate these objects to make sure the correct pieces are moving and the correct ones are staying still. Right? Also giving us the ability to make a prefab out of this object. Right, so this is the first experiment. All of these experiments can be found either on FSO, or if you look inside the IND229 content folder on Perforce, here in the entryway folder, because this is the assignment we're doing, there's these three experiments. Right, so we're not going through the process of showing you how to open and close a door, which is going to be your task for the entryway, but we're showing you the concepts of animation on another object, because from here, once you know how to animate this wind turbine, you're going to know how to animate a door, you're going to know how to animate a cutscene. It's all just the object that you're animating is now different, and the complexity starts to grow. But we're going to go over the basics of the animation and getting it working, and that's with starting and actually building the game object. So before you get started working, before you're actually in Unity and working, it's a good thing to first double check your changes, right, or your pending change lists. Make sure that they're clear and empty, right? So you'll see here, some people may panic when they see, oh my God, I see all these change lists, and I don't know how to differentiate, right? So maybe your filter is closed like this. Well, if you have this long list, you can filter by the user itself, right? So I can see the change list based on user or based on workspace, and you can find your own name, right? You can use this filter. So if the filter is deactivated, this is probably where you want to start. Come up here to current user, workspace, current workspace. Make sure you're looking at just your computer with your workspace, right? You may have working on another PC or something else where you have the same user with multiple workspaces. So it looks like here on my computer, I have files checked out. Right, that's a red flag to me as saying, hey, maybe I made this error by mistake. I need to correct this. Don't just start working. Right, if you have a bunch of files marked for delete, or if you have 4 or 5 changeless here that are all pending with nothing in them, you can go ahead and delete them or submit, depending on what the files are. So this looks like it was maybe a mistake, so it should be a review again. I'm going to revert these files. Right, pull all the files out of the change list. Perforce is thinking. There we go. Now the change list is out. Right. So if you ever get in the situation where, let me go ahead and check one of these folders out, and instead of putting it in the default list, got this window here. Right. Instead of the default list, I'm going to send it to a new list. Right. There it is. That list right there. Right. Now I'm going to go ahead and do the same revert. Now you see I have this empty change list. You don't have to follow along with this. I'm just showing the demonstration to where if you had files in a change list or you marked something for delete and you reverted the change list, that's the first step. Now you're going to see these empty change lists start building up. Right, now you can go ahead and delete this one, and now you're left with just the default list. You'll never be able to delete the default list. It's always there. And now you're ready to start working. Right, make sure for this task that we're going over, you're inside your Unity project. Right, I'm inside the working folder, created my own project just like we did for the visuals, should be in the exact same project inside here. And that's, make sure you're not in the project template. If you're working in the project template, you're going to have problems submitting these files to Perforce. So with this open in Unity, now again, just a reminder, you can tell that this project is open in Unity because the name. Right, here's the version of Unity, 5.6.0F3. Here's the scene that I'm currently in, the hub scene, hub.unity. Right, there's there in my inspector, or in the hierarchy. And then next to that is the name of the project. Right, you don't usually need this information, but it's important you're working in the right place. Right, last name, first name, project, 1705.5. If I look on Perforce, last name, first name, project, 1705.5. Right, I'm in that project. Right. So for the first experiment, and actually the first two experiments, we don't need the hub scene. Right. We can just be working in the ind2 underscore wind turbine scene. Right. So I'm going to not load the hub. Right. And I really stress this: when you're building complex game objects, focus on building them in a small little test bed rather than building them in your level. Right. If you already have a fully functional level and you're trying to implement a new mechanic, build that mechanic separately and then implement it with the rest of the system. Right? So inside the wind turbine scene, I'm going to be just creating the object. Right? But before I do so, I'm going to go and check out that scene. Right? For the first experiment, we're just going to be working on the scene file, and then things are going to get a little bit more complex. So there it is, inside scenes, ind229, there is that wind turbine scene.unity file. Right? I'm going to take that and the meta file and check them out. Let's send that to the change list. Right, there they are in that change list. There. And now back to Unity. Right, quick and painless, not too hard. All right, so to start, we're just going to be building the hierarchy. Right, so I'm going to start with just a 3D sphere. And I'm going to name this pivot. Now I'm going to put this at the world origin, right? So 0, 0, 0 in the position. And I'm going to keep this scale as is. It's very important that you keep the scale value as 1 for any object that is going to be having an animator component, right? So if you wanted to make this object larger, right, you want the sphere to physically look bigger, that's fine. But whatever object has your animator needs to have a clean scale value of 1. Right? And if you want to test that out and see what happens if you don't, try it, and then try to do an animation where you're rotating the object. You'll see that it's starting to break because Unity is trying to maintain that scale value and rotate, and it has a tough time figuring out which to do first, and you'll end up with a lot of strange results. So whatever object has your animator, whether it's an empty or something with an actual mesh renderer, like this component here, make sure you have a clean scale value of 1. Next, I'm going to go ahead and create a 3D capsule. I'm just going to call this the blade. And same thing, let's put it at the origin. So 0, 0, 0, 0. And now for this one, I am going to adjust the scale. Let's make this 3 in the Y and 0.25 in the Z. So the visuals for this aren't extremely important. Game design comes down to functionality first, right? Build that form, build the functionality, worry about what it looks like later. So you can go back and make this look like the most beautiful turbine you've ever seen. I'm worried about the functionality and making sure everyone understands the concepts. So now I'm going to go ahead and just duplicate the blade. And holding down Control, I'm going to rotate that one 60 degrees. Select the other one, duplicate that one, rotate that negative 60 degrees. And now you should have this flower shape. Now with the 3 blades, I'm going to make them the children of the pivot object. Right? So selecting all of the blades, you can do it one at a time if you'd like. Take the blades and drag and drop them into the pivot game object. Right? Clicking with my mouse and holding and letting go inside the pivot. Right, now you'll see that hierarchy is connected. Right, the blades are indented. You have this little drop-down arrow. This is now the parent object of the blades. Right, so as a test, if I take the pivot and move it around, notice how all the blades are following with it. Right, the transform for the pivot is being updated, but then look in the blades. Right, they're all still at 0, 0, 0. Right, that is now the transform of the pivot object. Right, the pivot is the actual now the 0, 0, 0 location of all the blades. Right, if I move this, it's still at 0, 0, 0. Right, so one thing to take away from this is when you move the parent, the children will follow, but it's not directly influencing their transform, it's being inherited. Right? That value is being inherited by the game object. So now with this blade, for example, if I move this up 1 unit, right, that's 1 unit from that origin, right, from that pivot object. So you can move children, and the parent isn't going to be affected. Right? Move this all day, the pivot is still in the same location, and that hierarchy is still intact, right? It's still the child. Right, you can keep that in mind for when you're building your animations and getting pieces to move how you want them to. Alright, so now let's go ahead and position these blades in place. So the first one, moving this vertically is pretty easy. Just hold down Control and snap it. 3 units up looks pretty good. Now these two over here, right? So you may have your widget looking like this, right? And that was me toggling between global and local space, right? So global space is that of just the world, right? Just as the name sounds. Look, if you see the widget up here in the corner, right? This is showing you the direction of world space. Notice how the widget matches on the game object. Y is always going to be pointing up. X is always left and right to the screen, and then Z is your depth. Right? Looking at it this way, Z is going into the screen or coming out at you. Right? So every time you rotate around the object using the camera, that world space or that global space is always the same direction. Right? So we can go ahead and move this object in world space and accomplish our goal, and we can finesse it enough to get it where we want it, but it's time consuming. Right? There's more clicks of the mouse. I had to move vertically, then horizontally, and then rinse and repeat. So Unity gives us the ability to toggle between global space and local space. Right? So what local space is that each object has that transform, has vectors, right? Has vectors coming off of it, to where the Y vector is always pointing up, right? Always pointing to the top of the game object, and then Z is always coming out. So, for example, you see as I rotate the object, right, the Y axis, the Y handle is always pointing towards the up direction of that local game object, right? It's local to this object. So that gives us the ability to very easily just hold down Control and slide and snap this into place where we'd like it. Right, we went over toggling between the pivot and center for the level blocking meshes. Now we're using this local and global, right? So you can accomplish what we're doing here with global space, but a little bit more tedious, right? Use all the tools at your disposal. And there we go. All right, the blades are in place. So now I'm just going to grab the pivot object and do a little rotation and test it. Get a little preview of what our animation is going to look like. Make sure everything is following along properly, nothing's breaking. And if your pivot is slightly up here, right, notice when I rotate now, it's rotating from a strange place, right? But what this location is actually the center of all of the game objects, right? So Unity is going to take this pivot and average the points, right here, right here, and right here, and average them all together, and that's the center of that object. So toggle to the actual pivot to make sure you're on the spheres or this pivot object pivot point, which is the center of the sphere itself. All right, that's the first step, getting that in place. Make sure to keep this at the origin. Let's put this back to 0, 0 for when I'm building. All right. So now I'm going to build the base, right, or the frame of what this will rest on. So I'm going to create a 3D cube. Keep this at the origin. And now I'm just going to move it into place. Again, visuals aren't extremely important. Something just to represent what this may be. Going for the entryway, moving forward, we definitely want to start focusing on believability and how this would actually function. But worry about just blocking it out first and getting the functionality working. So this is going to be the head. And now I'm going to also create a cylinder. And I'm going to name this the stalk. Okay, I'm going to give this cylinder down here in the scale, let's give it a value of 8 in the water. Make sure it's at the origin. Maybe why it looks so small. There we go. Just moving into place. Alright, there we go. Right, now we want to build this parent-child relationship. Right, so when I move the stalk, the head follows with it. Right, so drag this head, drop it into the stalk object. Alright, now from here, we want to build a container to hold all of this. Right, this is definitely an important step to build this as a prefab. Right. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and create an empty game object. All right, so an empty game object is just a game object with a transform component. If you look at a cube, which is what we did with the stalk, was just a cube that I created, or I'm sorry, I apologize, the head, right, that was a cube. You'll see that this cube is a game object with a transform component, a box collider, a mesh renderer, and then the mesh filter itself. Right, so that is basically an empty game object with these components. That is what we're starting here with this game object, right? Just an empty with a transform. We could add a mesh renderer to this and make it a cube if we really would like to. But we're just going to have this as a container to help build our hierarchy. These empty game objects are a great way for you guys as designers to set pivots and set locations of objects and how they move around other pieces, right? Using empties as your makeshift containers and your pivots. So this game object, I'm just going to go ahead and name it wind turbine, and I'm just going to call this underscore prefab, just to clearly indicate to everyone that's watching this and while you're learning that this is going to be the prefab object. This is the container that holds everything. All right, making sure that that's at the origin, I'm going to go ahead and group all of this together, right? So grabbing the stalk and the pivot, right, the two children, or the two parents that I want to be children, drag them and drop them into the wind turbine prefab. Right, everything should stay in place. A good idea to test this, rotate the pivot, make sure it's still working normally, right? Notice how the head and the stalk aren't moving. Everything's in place and it's rotating nicely. Right, and then also take a look at your wind turbine prefab, right? Still clean transform and scale and its location. Right, so if I turn on these little tags, and these are a great, these icons here, these are a great way to help those that are still wrapping their head around the empty game objects, or that just like a little visual indication of it, right? So you can select the color that you like. I'm going to choose blue, right? And now I can see where that wind turbine prefab is in the world, even though there's no renderer, or no mesh renderer displaying to the screen. So it's just a little icon. That's not going to show up in the game when you're running it. It's just helping you within the editor. So what we want to do here is set up where this game object is located, right? So when we create a prefab out of this, we can drop them in the world, and they come in a logical place. So to create a prefab, I'm going to go ahead and create a folder to put my prefab in, right? Just like I did for the visuals assignment, I'd like to create and I encourage everyone to create a folder for the experiment or the assignment that you're doing, right? So I'm going to just create a folder, wind turbine experiments. So everything I do for these three experiments, I'm going to put right in this folder. This helps those that are still getting used to Perforce understand where you're going and where you're submitting your files. Just remember, keeping organized and remembering file location. So now I'm going to drag my wind turbine prefab and drop that into my experiments folder, right? So now you'll see I can create a bunch of wind turbines, right, by dropping them in the world. But now notice about that pivot that I was talking about. So because this game object is at the center of the sphere that we've called the pivot, this is now snapping to other geometry, right? That's not the most ideal setup. We want them to snap, on the base where they would be connected to the ground. So what we want to do is adjust the children inside of this prefab. So I'm going to take the pivot and the stalk, and I'm going to move them to where the base of this cylinder is right at the origin, or right where the wind turbine prefab is located. All right, so with the tags turned, or the little icons turned on, notice as I move this, the wind turbine prefab isn't actually moving. Right? It's staying in the same place, and I'm just moving its children. So now you'll see when I select the prefab, it's right at the base of that object. We can definitely get it real precise if we'd like to. Making sure this gives us the best control, right? This is just setting this up for us to use this later on. All right, so now by selecting our prefab, we can go ahead and hit apply right here, and it will apply it to all of our prefabs that are in our scene, right? Making it easy, we can change one and then just hit this apply button to get that working for all of them. I'm going to go ahead and delete these other ones. We don't need those just yet. And the one other change I'm going to make before I go ahead and get this ready to work on the second experiment, I'm just going to take this pivot object right here, and I'm going to put a small little suffix at the end. And I just like to say animate me. Or you could say underscore animator. Basically, I want to communicate this is going to be the object with the animator component on it that we're animating. Right, and that'll be more important going forward. Also, a little addition I'm going to make that not a necessary step, but I like to display this and demonstrate it so everyone understands when building your hierarchy how setting up your children can help your animation in a very easy way. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a light, just a point light, just to showcase this. I'm going to move it out just slightly, have it right in front. And let's color this. Let me turn on the scene lighting so you guys can see it. Let's just give this a color. Let's go with like something yellow. All right, so we have a light on our wind turbine here. All right, let's just leave it the default range right now, and let's make sure that this is a child of the pivot. Right, so when we're going to be able to get access to this, so I'm going to just name this turbine underscore light. If you'd like to follow along with this, feel free. This is definitely going to be helpful. I just really want to demonstrate the process of setting up multiple children inside of your animated object. All right, let's go ahead and apply those changes to the prefab. So now you'll see when we drop these in, they all have a light, and all the pieces are in place. So now let's go ahead and just move this to where we want to further go forward. And now we're ready to go to the second experiment, right? So before you do so, make sure you save your scene, save your project, and let's come back and submit your work to Perforce. Right, you should really get in the habit of doing this often. That way that we have a saving point, right? If anything happens in the next experiment, we have this scene to go back to, and the first one is completed and done. So we have the scene in here checked out, but ask yourself, what did we do inside Unity, right? We worked on the scene, and we also created that prefab, right? So which is in our wind turbine experiments folder, right? So you can go ahead and just right-click on the folder, mark it for add. You can mark it for add up here. You can use the actions, or you can even drag that folder into your default change list, right? And there's a prefab getting marked for add. I've been having a very strange visual issue lately. That's why you can see that the folder opened. It looked like there was nothing, but you should be able to see those the assets inside that folder with a small little white piece of paper. Right, and for some reason, when I mark them for add, they start to show up. Now I'm going to submit my change list here. Right, now you'll see at the bottom of the experiments, right, we want you to submit the team here, we want you to submit your progress after each experiment. One, to have that backup, as well as to get practice and make sure you're actually submitting to Perforce and getting that experience. Right, so I'm just going to copy that little phrase there. Feel free to do the same. And I'm just going to paste it right in the description, right, that we've completed the first experiment. Then from here, I'm just also going to add in what I actually worked on. So I'm just going to write created the wind turbine prefab and added a light. And submit. All right, now that is our progress on Perforce. Right, now you'll see inside the IND229 folder, we have two versions of the wind turbine scene. Right, the one from when I added it, when I just added the empty scene to Perforce, like everyone did at the beginning of the month, and this one here, where I just submitted it, now with the changes where the scene contains the prefab. As well as now you should see your wind turbine experiments folder on the depot with that prefab inside of it. All right, so with that, that's the conclusion of the first experiment. I'll see you in the next video where we're going to continue on with the second experiment.